Welcome everyone, time for another nice hour or so of Shoe Talk. It's the Shoegazing podcast with episode 23. I'm Jesper Ingevaldsson of shoegazing.com, one of the largest blogs in the world on quality shoes. Affan Mohammed is the managing director of Bridlen shoes, an Indian maker of Goodyear welted footwear that is getting more and more attention both domestically and internationally. Founded by Affan's father Hasan, who had worked his whole life with leathercraft and shoemaking, and Mr. Watanabe from Japan, who among other things was involved in the start of Meermin. To make high-quality Goodyear welted shoes like Bridlen in India, a country with lower wages which mainly has a reputation of doing cheaper shoes, comes with its own set of challenges. We talked a lot around this topic, about how India is going through a big transformation in many regards, about Bridlen's special construction techniques like stitching the Goodyear seam directly to the leather insole and what they call 3D upper making, and much more. So enjoy your listen. All right, Affan Mohammed of Bridlen Shoes. Welcome to the Shoegazing podcast.
Thank you, Jesper. It's good to be here.
Yeah, in Stockholm, my home country.
It is finally we meet here in your home country.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we met in Amsterdam and London, and now finally in Sweden.
Good to see you.
Yeah, you too. Yeah, we're having the Swedish edition of the Super Trunk here tomorrow, where you'll be exhibiting. Yeah, so I'm looking forward to that. Finally, after 3 years almost now since we had the last edition here.
Yes.
Because of, we all know what. I'm thinking we can start a bit about sort of the background of Bridlen shoes, because it's quite an interesting one, I think. The man behind it is Mr. Hasan and Mr. Watanabe. So who are they?
So Mr. Hasan is my late father.
Yeah.
He started this with Mr. Watanabe, a good friend of his. So I'll try to answer that one at a time. So my father was also first a leatherman.
Yeah.
He used to make leathers and then converted them into uppers and then became a full shoemaker as well. So he had this very kind of hard work ethics, the kind of focus on taking care of the workers, taking care of the suppliers, he would say, and taking care of your clients. So the kind of strong ethics game that he had really appealed to his friend, Mr. Watanabe, who he met once in Spain, where Mr. Watanabe was a shoemaker.
Yeah.
He started his career as a shoemaker there, but his history goes back to he lived in South America. He's a man of many talents. He's a skilled knife artist. He's many things. He's also a welder, woodworker. So all these things put together, he says, helps him finally in his craft as a shoemaker itself. So when these guys met and tried to do some business originally, that didn't work out, and they started to make shoes for OEMs brands in Japan.
Yeah.
And one day they decided we should start something on our own as well. So that's when the idea of Bridlen came around. This is around 2010, I believe.
Yeah.
I wasn't in the business then. And at that time they said we'll go online. And online still wasn't a big deal back then.
In 2010?
2010
Yeah.
in Japan. So they started Bridlen.jp.
Okay.
As it was called then and still is now, and started to sell shoes online. And that went off fairly well. It was a little around 2016-17 where we started a .com, and that became the main page. And we still have .jp with a smaller capsule collection, but .jp is for Japanese speaking audience only, as you can imagine. So yeah, that's Mr. Hasan, my father. It was his kind of philosophy of having quality over quantity, and this kind of consistent look out for learning new things. That's why we thought, after his passing away, as a kind of respect and not to forget some of those ideals ourselves, we started the Founders Collection.
Yeah, exactly.
To kind of specialize on certain things, learn things, implement them on a line. So we we did that. So that's him. And Mr. Watanabe today is our kind of troubleshooter in chief, even though he's now in Japan. Before the lockdown, he'd spent about 6 months of the year with us in the factory.
Okay.
And he started this in 2009-10 when he started working with my father. He'd spent about 1 month in the factory, helping us in how to make shoes and how to make Goodyear welted shoes particularly, and then spend the other month in Tokyo.
Yeah, because he was also involved in with when Meermin started the Spanish Chinese brand. They started off in Japan, so to speak, and he was involved in that. Right?
He was working in a famous shoe factory in the Palma, Mallorca area, and helped Mr. Jose, you might probably know of, start Meermin.
Yeah, okay.
And he wanted to not do business in the Chinese region. He wanted to do something different. And it was one of these days that he met my father, and they hit it off well. So.
Cool. So your father started, it was like almost 40 years ago, something like that the factory started, or?
Yes, the factory started about, as old as me, just under 40 years, I'd say. But before that, he was already in the leather business. As I was saying, he's a leather man first. We never owned a tannery. He never owned a tannery either, but he was very passionate about leathers, the way he kind of understood leather and his ability to kind of look at a leather and try to make good leather. He had an eye for that. And that's what actually in the early days won us a lot of business. So we started making uppers for European clients. And the big challenge there was to make good leathers in India. And he managed to crack that code.
But he used the domestic leather.
He did. He did. And that's more challenging now. Back then you had better quality hides even in India. That's becoming lesser and lesser available
we'll talk more about that later.
Yes.
It's an interesting
topic
as well.
It is, yes. So that's there. So he started making leather first, and then started to make uppers, and then very quickly went on to make shoes. But it was not Goodyear welted shoes to start with.
Okay.
It was Blake shoes. So we started straight from Blake, did that for a few years. And he had this kind of urge to start Goodyear welted. And, chanced upon Mr. Watanabe, who also was looking for Goodyear welted. So it was a good meeting of minds. But it was not until a good 3-4 years, I believe, that the Goodyear project itself started. We had to kind of save up, buy the machines, and that's the kind of critical time when I came in.
Because how did
as well.
I understand that, of course, you were drawn in by your father, but when was that that you started working with?
So I started off at a very different trajectory, even though shoes and shoe conversation and leather conversations has been what I grew up with around the dinner table, you could say. And my grandfather's also a veteran leather maker and shoemaker, in a much kind of grander scale. And I'm influenced by both of these people in the business. But it was my interest was not so much in shoes, not so much in leather. As much as I heard all this, I found my calling and my interest more in recycling at a young age. And when I had to go to university to study, I asked my father, and he said, if you want to study this, that's what you should do. Don't look at the shoe as an obligation for you to do. Go and do that. So that's what I did. I first studied economics, and then I did a master's in environment. And got a job first at the United Nations in Switzerland, working for a recycling part of the environment program. Then moved to the private sector. In a short nutshell, I worked in the UK for a bit, South Africa, and then they put me in London. And one day my dad was visiting me in London, as he comes once in a while for business. And I told him, something is just not sitting right. This is already 7 years working for the same company, things are going well.
Yeah.
But after working in kind of the sector, doing the recycling, kind of, telling different materials from the other, I was in the end in a more kind of corporate setting. And I guess that didn't...
You moved sort of away from the thing that interested you.
Exactly. And so I asked him, and he said, there's this thing called Goodyear welted. Have you heard of it? I said, no, I don't know. Mr. Watanabe and I are thinking about starting this project, and I could use a hand for you to take care of everything else, because I want to do this myself.
Yeah.
So if you want, you start now, but you got to start from the bottom. I don't care if you've got 7 years of experience, recycling, you know nothing about shoes. So if that sounds like a challenge, you can come and give it a try. Okay. So I said, I'll give 1 year a try. If that works, that works. Otherwise, I'm going to...
And then you worked on the factory floor, so to speak.
So then I left my job in the UK.
Yeah.
Quit that, came back to India, and for the first 3 years I worked on the factory floor.
Yeah.
Yes, and it was that first year we decided to get the machines. So he sent me out to see what the machines were, learn how to use them, and then brought them here to India. And Mr. Watanabe already knew of it. So at that time I thought I need to go back to Europe to learn shoemaking from the Europeans, right? Yeah. So I signed up for this course in Florence to make bespoke shoes. And just a month, 3 weeks before leaving, Mr. Watanabe calls me in, and he's like, are you sure you want to go? I said, what do you mean? I mean, I signed up for it. I spoke to you about it. And it's like, yeah, but your machines are arriving in 3 months. This is your factory, your father's factory. You can stay here and learn to make shoes the way the business will be, or you could learn bespoke shoemaking, where you will make good shoes, very good shoes, but perhaps 3 or 4 pairs a day. Is that what you want to do? Is this what you want to do? And he completely confused me. I thought about it and I decided to stay.
Yeah, right.
And so 3 months later, we got the machines. We opened them up, and one by one we set them up. We didn't have orders. We didn't have any plan per se. We just knew we wanted to make Goodyear welted shoes.
And when was this around?
2016. 2016, yes. I got back just around end of 15, 16. So yeah, that was about then. So for the next 2 years or so, we only made sample shoes.
And what's the reason that you decided to go with, because that's sort of one of the asps of Bridlen, that you do the traditional technique where you do, even if you do with machine Goodyear welting, you stitch directly to the insole.
Correct.
Why did you end up with that technique?
So when we were discussing what can we bring differently, and Mr. Watanabe and I and my father were talking about this, he said, we're going to do something different than what's already out there in the market, so to speak, in the mid sector. We don't want to be cheap, but we also don't want to be too expensive. Another kind of Japanese philosophy that Mr. Watanabe keeps insisting upon is that we've got to make sure that the shoes are available to a wider audience so they can enjoy the product. No point just pricing it up. So there he said, this thing where if it is on a thicker leather insole, that's something not many people are doing. There are a handful of people, but not in a big way. If we do it, let's only do it that way. He said, okay. So it was not more than this reason that we decided to go with this as a technology. Certain other things developed as we progressed, but I have to tell you that it seemed like a mistake early on, this technology, because we went there. I went to the manufacturer in Italy, in Monte Granaro, I remember, and he said, many people have tried. I'll tell you this honestly, factories fail at this. Because the process is difficult, the rejection rate is very high, and unless you kind of sit down and almost talk to the machine and get it to behave well, it's hard to do this. But you can.
Because there's some, when they do this, like what they call flex Goodyear, some use something reminiscent of this.
Similar to this. The idea is simply that you take a thicker insole, but take a channel, which you can do by hand, but the consistency when you have a fixed knife is better. The difficult part was to find the right raw material. The kind of tannage that goes into vegetable tanning doesn't quite allow for a machine to channel it.
Okay.
So then we experimented with various tanning methods. My father was able to play with the whatever you put into leathers. I'm not so much a leather guy myself. And then we found out that the Italian leather seemed to have something called ingarsato.
Okay.
Which makes it very soft yet abrasive resistant. And that proved in the end of the day to be a game changer.
All right.
So the insoles that we use now is from one of those tanneries we worked with, and actually the outsoles as well for the main line is from that tannery. So that changed it, and that gave us that new thing, so to speak, the USP for the market, besides another couple of things that we also do.
Yeah, because I know one thing that I don't really fully understand what it is, but I know that you sort of stitched uppers in some a bit different way. Can you explain that? Because I read the description of it and it didn't.
Sure.
I didn't understand it in my mind, so to speak.
So we call it the 3D attachment, or 3-dimensional attachment. So this was somewhere not too long ago, about 3 or 4 years ago, I think, just before the lockdown, a year before the lockdown, we were seeing that the uppers are made in a certain way, and in the full shoe factory, even if it's not 100% perfect, we can last it around the last, and it gets shape. But we said once we do that, the touch of the leather, what it was in the hide versus what it is in the final shoe, is not the same, and we're giving it a lot of pressure by pulling it. What can we do to the upper making process that can give it the same touch as we enjoy in the hide format without having to give force, too much heat in the full shoemaking process? So we took inspiration from haute couture, where they make the dress on a bust. So we said, let's try to make the upper on the last. So you take a last, last on that particular upper is supposed to be made on, and we first attach it along the lines. So keep the attaching lines, and then it's not the best for a radio conversation, but you can see me here. And now that you told me this feedback, we'll put a video on the website. We'll do that. And so when you kind of attach it along the lines, what it does is the feet has what's called a positive dimension and then a negative dimension. The upper leather now respects that. It kind of takes those lines.
But you don't stitch it on the last, you sort of block it.
We don't block it. We only attach it along the lines where the stitches have to happen. We attach it temporarily and then take it to the stitching machine and stitch it. But that's not the only thing in the 3D attachment process. By doing this, we are able to do away with interlining materials, because we're giving the leather itself the ability to mold around the last.
So how long do you sort of leave it on the last?
We don't have to leave it for long at all. The idea is once you kind of attach it along those lines,
is it
immediately take
wetted and attached, or just
no, because this is chrome tan leather. It could help, but doesn't help a great lot. You hold it there, take it immediately and stitch it, so that positive line and the negative line, negative dimension, is immediately stitched. So the upper kind of holds that shape.
I see,
And now with no interlining materials in between, and we ensure there's no glues in between, even that little glue that we did initially to hold it in place before the stitching, we remove it after stitching. We put a bit of powder and remove it, keeping breathability intact. And what we did was we inversed the thickness. So we made the lining leather a bit thicker to give more body. So we don't use interlinings. And all this together is what the 3D upper making technology kind of encapsulates. 3 things within 3D idea. And when now you take this to the full shoe factory and last it, the effort you need to last the upper is very minimal. The upper's already been, the upper's made to the last shape itself, so to speak. So you can very easily last the shoe. And finally, when you finish the shoe and you use it, its ability to come back to shape to off the last is much better. So over the course of many years and months, it holds shape much better, these shoes. So this is what we're finding now, and hopefully people can see this.
Yeah, okay,
as well.
yeah. Yeah, now I understand what you mean. You should describe it better.
And on a video.
Yeah, exactly. And
on a video, yeah.
And it makes sense, like you said, because that's one issue that one don't really talk about too much. That, for example, a lot of factory-made shoes have this backing with canvas textile, which is, and some really use shitloads of glue on there, just in between the layers. And yeah, like you say, breathability, a lot of that good thing that the leather brings is removed if you have glue, too much glue in between.
That's it. They also do that to give to hold shape better.
Yeah, exactly.
And now you can do that by putting the effort in a different way, in the 3D way, and not have to use that canvas material anymore.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
All right, cool. So, how big is the Bridlen factory today?
The factory, it's a small factory by Indian standards. We're about 200 people. I see a line. By Indian standards, yeah. I mean, because...
But everything in numbers is different from, especially here in Sweden.
Yes.
I mean, you talked about it before, with 10 million people in Sweden, and that's like your city alone.
My city alone, that's right. But in India, the shoe factories tend to be a lot larger. And when I say India, we should also make the distinction between North India and South India. It's two different shoemaking environments and specialities even.
Because where is your...
we're in the south.
Yeah.
Where Chennai is in the southernmost state, the capital of the southernmost state, where factories tend to be a lot larger. 2,000 people, 3,000 people working. Somewhere in those ranges. That's why the word small. But the more important word of the meaning of the word small, I'd like to emphasize, is the fact that it's a family-run business. It was my father then. Now my sister's in the business. Afia takes care of customer services, all the other back-end finance and operations I take care of. Zahan takes care of the social media, sales, trunk shows, things like that. So it's a kind of cozy atmosphere. We've got people working for us now, the third generation, and that trust that we built with not just our workers or suppliers, that continues from generation to generation. So in that sense, it's more of a small, quote unquote, family run business. We're about 200 strong at the moment, and that's between our upper business. So we've got a business that does uppers to Europe.
You still have that sort of...
oh, yes, we do.
As one section of the...
And that's where I'd say our strength of understanding upper making comes from as well. So that one remains. We've got a Blake line and then the Goodyear line. The Blake line and Goodyear line next to each other and do similar things. We share machines. So
roughly how many uppers do you produce? How many Blake stitch shoes and how many Goodyear welted shoes a month?
So we make, we have about, I'll put it in lines. I don't think of it so much in numbers. We've got 4 upper lines. So a line is where you make for one kind of customer, not necessarily one article or one style. Within that customer, you have many styles. So we make for 2 lines to upper customers in Europe, and for 2 lines we make for our own factory. One for the Goodyear line, one for the Blake line. And with the Blake line and the Goodyear line business, we make for the Japanese OEMs. We made obviously for Bridlen ourselves, and for some OEM brands in the UK and in Germany more recently.
Okay.
So it's not a big production by any standard.
How many pairs?
We make about 50 to 70 pairs in the Goodyear line in one day.
50 to 70 pairs per day?
Per day in the Goodyear. In the Blake line, about 200. We have the capacity to go to about 350, but we keep it to 200 to keep the quality standard, because this is something we've done in the past, and our growth trajectory has always been with better quality rather than quantity. So if you see, we've reduced our quantities over the years. We used to make 350 even 400, I believe, at one time. Now our business has grown, but we make fewer pairs. We make only 200. The Goodyear line was not there. We started off by making 5-10 pairs. Now we can make up between 50 to 70 pairs in one day. So that's a growing space for us.
And of the finished shoes, you still make OEM for other brands?
Yes, we continue to make mostly for Japan, OEM brands in Japan. That's where we started our kind of classic shoe market, so to speak, but also to the UK. That's also been with us for a long time now. And we started to recently make, started with Blake first and then now Goodyear as well, of course. So, these are our two big markets, I would say.
Yeah. So, how big is the Bridlen brand, so to speak, of the total production now? Is it?
It's growing. It's growing very quickly. The lockdown is what gave us the break. We thought when we came to Amsterdam just before the lockdown.
Just before
the lockdown, right?
Lockdown, the final week you could travel in the world.
That's it. We thought that would be our kind of, breaking moment, our kind of introduction to Europe, as it were. Because in Japan, we've been selling not just the OEM, but Bridlen as well has been doing fairly well.
Yeah, exactly. And you were at Isetan. And
that's it. Yeah. So the idea was to take it outside Japan. And we didn't honestly look at India as a big market. We said we'll go Europe, we'll understand that for a couple of years and then perhaps look at the United States or something. And then lockdown happened. And for the first 2 months, our factory was closed as well. In India, there was a proper lockdown. And when we started, DHL was not going to do any deliveries besides essentials. And we had to do business and we said, okay, let's look at Instagram in India. And when we did that, we were surprised by the people who came back and said, okay, we'll give you a try. And when we had a conversation, and I honestly just called them up and said, thank you for the order. Can I know what got you to, get interest in our brand? And said, very simple, I can't travel. I can't get my Goodyear shoes from where I usually get. I thought we'll give you a try. I said, okay, thank you. And we set out. And that's how we kind of collected one at a time. And then we found a lot of people also weren't willing to trust us as an internet first brand, right? So that's why we started to do these trunk shows. More recently, we kind of made a database of people who said they'd like to try us, but won't until we touch, feel the product. So we did that. And then India started to become a very good market size for us. Now I would say it's about just under 50% between Japan, 50, and then India, the other 50 or so. Less than 50 because the rest of the world is still doing about 15%, which I think will start to change now that we're doing these trunk shows, because we're seeing a lot of interest coming from these trunk shows, and then bloggers and whatnot. So I think that percentage is up for change in the next couple of years.
Cool. And then maybe you're looking at the US as well then for the future.
I'd like to, but honestly, I don't have a good enough understanding of the market, and I'm not too keen to increase the capacity too much either. I'd rather we go one step at a time, keep the quality level consistent rather than just increase quantity and see any drop in our quality. So I was telling you earlier, we made 5-10 pairs a day because that's all we could manage. It's a small team, multi-skilled. So when we don't do it where one person does only one job. We skill everybody, not everybody, but one person to do a few jobs. So they're not getting bored in the same thing, and they're learning something as well that they can hopefully pass on to the next generation in due course. So in that kind of production, we can't make too many pairs. So that focus to keep quality consistent, and if we can add another 5 pairs in the next year, great. Another 10 pairs the following year, well and good, and let the market then saturate that extra supply that we can create, rather than go the other way around, go and create a market and we suddenly have 100 extra pairs and we can't do it. I'm a little hesitant of that model. So America is interesting, but I think we'll take it one step at a time.
It's interesting. That's the way you run the factory is sort of a very Swedish way of doing things, that people are in different stations, not only specializing in one thing and doing that, but move around a bit just to, like you say, get stimulated and for the work environment and to do different things with your body and stuff like that. It's a very Swedish way of thinking at it.
That's interesting. It's Swedish. I didn't know that. That's quite a nice thing to hear.
I mean, of course, there's other parts of the world as well, but in Sweden, you never have factories but it's very important that you have a mix of work in the factory, so to speak.
We've followed this not just actually in the Goodyear line. Now that you mentioned this, I'm thinking, and we've had this as part of our DNA even in our upper factory. They do a few things and then they move it on to the next person. So like you said, they have more kind of physical movement. They're not getting tired. Their limbs aren't doing just the same thing. For health and safety reasons, this is a good thing. But for the mind, it keeps it fresher. And once in a while, we have somebody who come and say, after 3 years, I'm getting tired of this. And I say, okay, let's try something else. What would you like to learn elsewhere in the line? So you could become in 10 years, perhaps able to make the whole thing yourself even. And by now, we have about, I think, 4-5 people who could do the whole thing.
When one think about shoes produced in countries like India, it's not quality welted shoes that most think about. So how big is this sort of quote unquote niche within the shoe industry in India, would you say?
So in the niche, I'd say first on the kind of supply side, the factory side, as I was saying earlier, factories tend to be bigger. But more recently, there has been an uptick of smaller factories as well, focusing more on quality. And I think this is a very good trend. This has been more out of necessity, I would think, because the bigger production, so to speak, for the fast fashion brands are moving to lower wage countries. In Europe, you'd still perhaps see India as a low-wage country, but that's quickly changing. The last 10-15 years, wages have gone up tremendously. And you have to understand, we are competing now with other industries, mostly services, IT, and if it is manufacturing, it is high-value manufacturing. We've got an iPhone factory just down the road, and younger people want to be in a cooler environment making iPhones than shoes. So we will, I think, continue to make for some of these fast fashion brands in India. But if you are starting something new or looking at a more long-term business as a medium or a small sized business, you're better off concentrating on quality. And people are seeing this, and the new entrants and some people have even scaled down their businesses now to say we'll concentrate on quality. But it's one thing saying this, it has to kind of come from top down. The owners have to speak that language, and then the staff will follow. And that is happening in a small way, but it's in that direction. On the demand side of things, the niche, as we spoke earlier, is niche. The word means small, but in India it's fairly big. We're a big country, but the kind of people who wear classic shoes, let's say, are lawyers or bankers or people who are fairly well dressed going into an office environment, right? And those jobs aren't as many. I still put it as many, quote unquote, on radio. I'm putting my fingers up and showing it to Jesper. It's about 300 million to 400 million on a more conservative number.
And a lot of those buy domestic shoes, welted classic shoes?
No. This is what we'd call the middle income, people. And within that, the trend now isn't so much welted. The people who are traveling abroad, who have understood feet comfort or shoe comfort, do this. But with the advent of the internet, we are finding younger people looking up for options besides fast fashion. That trend towards sustainability, sustainable consumption, that's already started to happen within that 300 million people. Not everybody, but more and more people are looking for these solutions. And when they look for that, obviously there are lots of options in Europe, in America, and Japan perhaps, but within India, not as many. They could get it, but they'll have to pay, I think it's about 30% duties. And then you've got obviously problem with sizing and returns and whatnot. So I think we're coming up in that space to cater, and we're not alone. We've seen some good, movement in this space. I don't know, maybe because I wasn't in that space earlier that I didn't see this, but the last 3 years, I would say, more Goodyear welted brands have been coming out of India. And this tends to be in the northern part. So we spoke earlier about the north-south
so northern is smaller factories. Was it
so in the north, so the industry around shoes developed around where the tanneries were.
Yeah.
So in south, you've got the tannery belt, and in the north, you've got another tannery belt. And in the north, they were concentrating the shoe industry more in safety shoemaking.
Okay.
So they have a few more Goodyear welted factories in the north, but those that have concentrated historically only on making safety Goodyear. And as you know, they're different, kind of chunkier, different materials made for a different purpose. So that finesse might not be there. But I suppose now the next generation is coming around and trying to do things a bit different. So I'm very happy to see this, because as one factory or one brand on ourselves, we're never going to be enough to cater to the Indian market, and also to change the narrative around what is a made in India product. We've seen this happen successfully in countries like Spain. I remember Mr. Watanabe told me when he started his career in Spain, he found it challenging because in Europe, Spanish shoes were not considered great quality. I'm talking 40 years ago.
Exactly.
The Europeans would see that and it's like, whatever kind of a quality. And now you've got some great brands out of Spain. So that was one of the reasons he said, we start this now in South India, and I can tell you in 10 years time, it'll be a different space. You will not be the only one, but you along with a few others will be able to change that name. So I also remember he was proudly putting made in India in Japan. And I remember over a conversation, we asked some people in Japan, the buyers, do you not mind the fact that, we put made in India quite boldly, actually. And they said, no, as long as the quality is good, which we can see it is, and the leathers also back then were made by ourselves, there's no problem. And I've seen this now doing these trunk shows, that is actually not a problem if you can translate good quality and consistently. But it's one pair at a time, one customer at a time.
Yeah, because people in general, I would say, would be a bit more like hesitant towards made in India, for example, than made in Europe. But you see that when they see the product, that doesn't matter that much anymore, so to speak.
That's correct. And the younger people are less, they're agnostic to the country, and seem to see that if there is good value in what they're buying, that's fine. One customer in Delhi recently, he came to the trunk show and he said, the only reason I'm coming is I was in the UK, and without mentioning the name of the brand, I could buy 3 of your shoes for 1 of theirs. And I don't see any difference in terms of the spec or the quality. I said, okay, I'm not going to correct you there. I mean, it's a good shoe. But so that's okay. They don't mind having a made in India shoe as long as the quality matches. And that there remains our challenge, that we don't drop the ball. Keep that focus on quality, consistency. And I think it's a long game, as we know this has always been.
And what other challenges is there to sort of produce premium shoes in a country that's seen as a low-wage country, even if it's maybe not really anymore? But what other challenges do you see?
The one that we were speaking about earlier was of holding talent, first of attracting talent, because it's not the kind of sexiest industry to work in. But once they come in, to hold them there, because we are investing a lot of time in teaching them certain skills, and not just one skill, multi-skilling them. And when we're talking about certain handcrafts, they only get better after the 6th month or the 8th month. And then after the first year, we put them onto something else. So it's keeping them there. So here it's not just the remuneration, which obviously they're fairly well paid. These things also perhaps something to kind of get out of the way. They work in India, but in South India where we have a factory, most, and I say this quite confidently, most factories are good factories in that minimum wage is obviously taken care of. They all have social security benefits like your healthcare benefits and things like that. But it's not just these things that will keep your workers. You've got to engage with them. The fact that I spend more time in the floor working with them, you get to know them better. You do social events with them and things like that, as you would here as well, I suppose. You do this, you take care of their needs, they take care of your needs, and it's a kind of quid pro quo thing. Yeah. So that's one challenge which we're slowly overcoming. It's more with young people, but the other thing we found quite challenging is when we got the machines from Italy, we don't have the technical know-how, how to best take care of them. When it comes to spares, I still have to buy it from Europe.
Yeah, you don't have that because Goodyear welting hasn't been done for many years. You don't have that sort of what would you call it? The
ecosystem.
Ecosystem, exactly, like you have in Northampton, Marke, Almanza, for example.
Correct. So we've got friends and colleagues in Montegranaro or somewhere. We call them on a video call and say, we've got this problem. Can you help us? Sometimes we could be down for a day. We've had situations where we were down for half a week even, and that's not good. So that's a challenge. Even small parts like the knives, I get them from Italy or Spain because the quality of the knife maker or the steel is not what we need. So these smaller challenges, parts, consumables for machinery, the technical know-how as it is a problem, breakdown, servicing kind of a thing. And generally the availability of the ancillary industry, the ecosystem as we were speaking of earlier. If you want to have a leather board counter, we found one and we are able to do that, but we're developing this. So that's also something that's helped us in the last 30 odd years with this relationship with suppliers, as I was speaking. They've kind of set themselves up around us. We've got people who work and have bought a house near the factory now, so they come here. Our suppliers have set themselves up somewhere around us, even in a small way, and they can supply to us. And we handhold them to show this is how we'd like it differently. But the challenge for them is we're only one or maybe two factories or three factories in the area asking for this special thing, and the quantities aren't great. So that's why I say more the merrier.
Yeah, exactly. So you can maybe get that ecosystem in a few years' time or so. Yeah,
I think so. I think that's the direction we're heading in. So there are some challenges, but we're facing one at a time and finding the solutions.
And I know you also sort of both on working environment, we talked about that, but also sustainability, something that you sort of focus on. Can you tell me a bit about that?
So my passion being in the recycling space and sustainability.
I understand that now,
that was one of, it was very important for me when I came here. And the fact that when my father first explained to me what was Goodyear welted shoe, I said, oh, this is great. This sounds like a sustainable way of making shoes and wearing shoes. So we call it the kind of slow production method. Again, similar to what we spoke of earlier, where we do things in batches. The thrust is not so much to produce so many quantities per day, but to slow produce, like the slow food movement, if you like. So that itself brings a certain level of sustainability because our wastage is lesser. We aren't doing that many recuts because we've pushed through certain pairs. And when you do that, you say, okay, always cut another 5% extra. If it gets wasted, it gets wasted. No, we don't. Cut as much as you only need, and then if something happens, we will do that again. So that's kind of the first level, is to reduce the waste, and the 3 R's concept, if you like. Reduce the waste to start with, reuse it as much as possible. So in the cutting department, as you've seen with our leathers, we take a better selection of leathers to start
that's
with.
one of the things that I was most impressed with the shoes I have from you. The quality of the upper leathers, very, very good for shoes at this price point.
If you can control the materials that are coming into your factory to be the ones that you need, so then your rejection rate, quote unquote, is lower, so your wastage is lower. So you first reduce the bad stuff coming in, so you use the good stuff, and then cut them as frugally as possible. But also what is left over, there are industries downstream that can make keychains out of them, or bags or whatever from the leathers that aren't usable. Make sure it goes there. For some other industrial wastes, ensure that they're properly recycled, not just going into a landfill site. So we do that. If it's electronic waste, it has to be managed and handled to the right vendors. And that sometimes means paying a bit more for your waste to go, which is a concept that's still fairly new in Europe. Yes, I mean, I know from living here in the past, that's fairly normal. But in India, it isn't as much. So that we adopted. We said, this is a cost, this is a cost. We have to not externalize things to the environment. So bring that concept in. But even smaller changes, so we saw in certain places we use plastic that is maybe 2 times, 3 times, and then because it gets fuzzy or tears, we can't reuse them. We saw we had some fabrics that were rejected for some other reason. We made bags out of those. And now we have more or less, I wouldn't say 100%, but a more or less plastic-free environment. And wherever there's single-use items, we try to re-engineer it. So we saw from the upper factory, you put laces that are simply cut off in the full shoe factory to keep the eyelets in place.
All right, yeah.
We just tip them. So they can simply be removed. It takes a bit more time rather than cut them off, and then goes back to the upper factory. Okay. So it gets reused. Yeah. So small things that you need to consistently look for that can bring about sustainability in a meaningful way. So you reduce the wastage at the sort of end of the day.
And you mentioned a bit about it, but I mean, can manufacturers like you sort of push the rest of the shoe industry in India in sort of the right direction, so to speak?
I have to humbly say we are too small to make a big difference just yet. But I think
in the long run...
I think we're setting an example of sorts where, we're showing that this too is a good business. The kind of small is beautiful concept, and more people can come. We're an open book in the sense that if someone wants to see how this is done, I say, come on board. Let's have a walk around and do this. Maybe I'm not going to show you how we do our 3D attachment or something in detail, but if you want to understand the concept of how a small shoe factory works, come on board, learn this, and it is easily profitable in due course. But what will help also is a kind of shifting of the narrative around certain things. And I wanted to make a point, which you have actually spoken about quite a bit, I think, Jesper, is around leather and how it's mislabeled, right?
Yeah.
And this is something in India, it's becoming more and more of a popular thing. Vegan materials. I'm not going to say vegan leather.
No,
vegan materials. The idea that it is more sustainable. This is perhaps up for debate, but my research shows me that leather is more sustainable.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at a calf or a cow as something, the whole area of it growing up and everything around that, only taken over to the leather side, that would mean a bigger environmental impact. But you have to look at it as a byproduct of the meat. And that puts it in a very different perspective.
Correct. And then you look at it as something, if you didn't use the leather, it was going to go to landfill.
Yeah.
And the waste that would create, rather you do something else with the leather, which is make the hide into leather. And what's the environmental impact of that? Is that better? It turns out it is.
Yeah.
And then if shoes were made from it and this shoe lasts you much longer, than quote unquote non-leather material or vegan material, then you're better off at the end of the day. So these conversations is what we are having also at the trunk show. So we're not calling it the trunk show, we're calling it Meet the Shoemaker. The idea is that people come there to have a conversation, speak to us about it. The sale is not as important. And here we're picking up on these conversations and where possible, informing clients differently. So I think that's a part that I think we can help the shoe industry, as it were, as a whole. But recognition at an international level, something like this podcast, even the super trunk shows that we're doing, all this is definitely helping the industry in a big way. And I think this will happen. We spoke of this earlier. It has happened in Spain. I take that as an inspiration. The timeline is important. And in the course of time, I think India also will see this. But we've also seen this in a small way in other Asian countries. We have seen in this trunk show as well more Asian participation. I'm happy to see people from Vietnam, from China. Few years ago, made in China was not considered great. Exactly. And I have great respect for what I've seen now coming out of China. I saw at the London Super Trunk Show and some more brands which I believe we will see tomorrow even. So it's a shift that's happening, and I'd like to think we're playing a small part in this now, and we'll hope to contribute more towards that shift.
And I mean, what else is needed, not only from you, but in general to progress the shoe industry as a whole in countries like India and other, Asian countries that have a similar type of production today?
This is a shift that's happening, but maybe we need to prod it a bit more. Is the narrative shift from fast fashion to slower forms of not slow forms of production, but more sustainable. I call it sustainable styling. If we get classic styles, you can style it through the years. See, the pendulum of fashion will always come back to classic shoes at some point, but there's a core market for classic shoes that never dies if that core market keeps getting bigger, and I think that is happening with adding younger people to it. That's a good thing. That's something that's happening, but events like this is something that will, I think, accelerate it even further. Japan, for example, I think was the last bastion of formal dressing, and I believe that's changing. I've not been there in 3 years.
Nowadays, not even bankers in London wear ties anymore and stuff like that. You see that things are changing for sure in this area. So we'll see. I think in India for sure, the market is just in the beginning. People are getting more affluent. With that, they want to dress in a certain way, and some part of that wardrobe does have classic shoes, even if more and more sneakers are coming into the play. And I think sneakers is a good thing. But as I say, even for dressing, you don't always wear a t-shirt out for everything. You've got a t-shirt for certain events, a collared shirt for something else, a jacket for something else. Similarly, the men's wardrobe also has to be built for different purposes. And Instagram is helping this in a big way. We're seeing lots of influencers in India as well, doing the kind of right styling, as I would put it. What I don't like as much, without sounding too harsh, is if you just pair sneakers with everything, right? Sneakers are great for certain things, and obviously it has its place for sportswear, but sometimes it's nice to dress with a formal shoe for exactly. And there's so many things in between that are of a much higher quality. You can have Goodyear welted shoes that are just as casual as sneakers, and you have all the whole workwear boot segment, so to speak, which is a totally different type of shoe than the sneakers, but can be worn rather similarly in many regards, so to speak.
Correct. That's actually an area that was very interesting. Post-COVID, we too were scratching our heads around how can we make the Goodyear construction made available to people who'd like to dress a little bit more casually. And from there, that casual classics. And we're toying with the word called Easy Goodyear now. We came up with a collection using softer leathers, but the same insole, leather outsole, little bit of rubber faux part, just for people to break into the idea of wearing Goodyear welted to start off with. They don't want to move from a sneaker to an Oxford, but here's perhaps a double monk or a two-eye derby, which is easier to manage because some people have trouble having to tie laces. So two-eye derby. So we're trying this to say, enjoy the Goodyear construction because we're sure you'll come back for the comfort of it as long as you give it a try. And that's you're quite right. There's a lot in between just Oxfords and sneakers. There's that workspace area as well, work
and
footwear.
I mean, like I think this is something you can talk about forever, but it's a very interesting topic to, looking at it from a sustainability perspective, that it's with everything that we know today. I mean, look back around the turn of the previous century, 1900s, around there, where in general what people wore, both clothing and footwear, it was really sustainable stuff because it was produced in relatively low quantities. You had a limited number of garments and footwear that you used and cared for and all that in general. And if we would sort of go back to that thinking that, we buy something of a much higher quality and you wear it and care for it and in a totally different way. Even if it's sneakers, you can make excellent quality sneakers and stuff like that. And like that, stitched down shoes with crepe soles and that type of, soft footwear that's really comfortable, but can be resold in a different way and all these type of things that. Because with today's technology and today's manufacturing know-how, so to speak, you could cater to a huge amount of people in a sustainable way.
Absolutely.
Without having to pop out these shitty produced stuff that will fall apart in a year or two. And I think that's where we have to go, sort of looking at it on a grander scale to keep this planet alive.
I think you're right. Absolutely. I think that change is happening. I saw a lot of people during COVID and post-COVID started to make that shift. They saw that there was a lot of wastage in their wardrobes and said, how can we change this? We're seeing a lot of people coming from the tailoring. So first they kind of start off with the tailoring.
Exactly.
They spend there. And they said, okay, I think we've got that covered. How do we style, or what's the beginning of the capsule wardrobe for shoes? Yeah. So that's happening, I think.
And you buy, overshirts of proper thick wool and stuff like that. And everything, all these oil wax jackets and things that you can have for decades in your wardrobe. And
so it's that part
repair
about repair and caring for your, like you spoke about the wax. That's a very interesting concept, and it increases the life of your jackets and their shoe care. Is something that's we haven't spoken about it, but also people are waking up to the fact of to the idea of shoe shine Sundays. We have clients sending us photos once in a while saying we shine our shoes. So I'm very optimistic of this space. It's perhaps because we've just started off and we see a lot of light in our direction, but I'm very positive about this space.
Cool. I just wanted to talk about also a bit about the sort of leather industry in India, because I mean, for you mainly work with European leathers for the Bridlen shoes, but how would you say that the overall sort of quality of the Indian leather industry is today?
So historically, India has made very good leathers, and if you go back, the tanning industry started during the British era when India was still under the British Empire, and we were making leathers for the garrisons and then exporting it to England as well. So you can imagine the quality of leathers made was quite good, and a lot of the good big tanneries around today are from that period, even in the same buildings. So they have that technology, that understanding. Some of them are still exporting very good quality leathers out of the country, but they might not necessarily be the kind of leather we're looking for in the classic shoe industry. I'm talking box calf leathers. They're making very good leathers for bags, for upholstery, for casual shoes. They might perhaps be something for box calf. I haven't come across any great tanneries that will have the leather that I'm looking for, but I'm quite sure they're there. We have a very small demand in the scheme of things, and they're looking also to run a business. So if there is enough demand, I'm sure it's possible. And I say this with confidence because not very long ago, we were making our own leathers, particularly for the Japanese market, where they appreciated us again for the leather itself. And we were doing this by buying raw material, European raw material, hides, bringing them to India, so in the wet blue stage, and finishing them in India. But that's because my father was a leatherman. He understood that process fairly well. We don't do that anymore. Also because the duty structure changed more recently. There is a duty on raw and wet blue hides. In India, the hides that are available perhaps aren't as suitable for box calf type leathers. The substance is different. The weather conditions are different. The grazing conditions are different. As you know, in South America, you can easily tell a hide because it has cattle branding marks. Different countries have different strengths. The European hides do particularly well in this classic shoe space. So India can make good leathers. The demand for classic shoe leather types has not been as high. Is my take from this space. And people who have shoe factories with tanneries, so tanneries who kind of moved up the supply chain and started to make shoes, make it for the kind of demand that they have to cater to. So if they got a tannery and they're making sneakers for 8 months of the year, that's the kind of leathers that they're making, and that's the kind of leathers they become specialized in making as well. And that demand is coming from Europe, Americas. And here's a trend that's not too healthy, is that prices have been going down for products in Europe, in America, everywhere. And with that, the kind of quality also drops. And there I've seen a certain shift in the quality standards of leathers. This is not to say they can't make great leathers, because they can. The demand has been different more recently. I would say the last 10, 15, 20 years for more affordable leathers. And here, as you know, you're not able to use top grade stuff. You have to snuff the leathers. You have to do things to it that's kind of compromises the whole point of leather itself. That's a bit of a pity. But that can change. That if the demand changes, I think they will be able to.
How is the sort of the sustainability and environmental impact side of the industry? Because I know there's been issues. India hasn't been the worst, I believe, but there's one of the countries that polluted and stuff like that.
Absolutely. In the kind of evolution of the industry, about 20 years ago, there was a big cleanup. And the south part of the country did very well in that. The bigger ones built their own effluent treatment plants. Then they had the concept of common effluent treatment plants for smaller tanners, where it would be monitored, the amount that you can let in. So they cleaned up their act for the most part. And always there's going to be some bad apples. But this is far and few between. The North too has done the same thing. And more recently, it's starting to kind of green the space. But in an intentionally good way, not as a greenwashing exercise. That did happen for some time, I believe. Where, just to tick the right boxes, you do the basics, but the idea or the mentality still was, we'll continue as it was in the past. But now you're not going to survive in that kind of a space.
No, I mean, nowadays quite a lot has happened also in Bangladesh, which has been one of the absolute worst when it comes to how the tanning industry has affected both people and the environment. But also there a lot is happening now, which is very positive. We see it with the cotton as well. I mean, like you say, you can't really continue as you did for a lot of reasons.
In the evolution of every space, industry or country, there's the bad and then they kind of move towards the good. That should get accelerated, I believe. You shouldn't have to take 30 or 50 years to do that. When that awareness has come, which it has come very strongly so, and there's a big push from the European makers, from the American makers, and that happened 20 years ago. So that shift has happened, I'd say. So you'd find now in India, the concept of LWG, the leather working group, is very normal. Most tanneries would respect the basic conditions for that. And in my opinion, it's not simply also getting a tag. It has to be the mentality of the owners of the tannery. So we buy our lining leathers in India. So we buy our uppers from Europe, but our lining leathers are made in India. So I work with tanners who are also owners. So I can see or understand their mentality. And it has to be honest. They should not want to pollute the environment. They should want to take care of it for their next generation. And you can tell that from a person after a few conversations. If it's just an LWG or another certification for the sake of it, or if they really have changed, turned the page in their mind. And now I'm fairly certain most have done this. So it's a shift that has in this space, not the one that has happened slowly. It has happened now, more or less in India. So
interesting. And so going forward, where do you see the quality shoe industry going in the coming decade or so for India?
For India, I think we're growing as a country with that growth of the middle market, as I was speaking earlier. We're scratching on the surface. With the shift of fashion, things will get better. If people start to see classic shoes as a fashionable thing, our position will be better faster. But nevertheless, that core market we spoke of earlier, that is getting bigger. More people want classic shoes, and that's their way of dressing. That's the way they want to be seen, and that is definitely moving fast in a good direction in India. And I'd like to see us not just catering to the Indian market, though it is definitely a big part. I'd like to see us as one of those kind of rites to passage shoemakers out of India. Like you've got Alan Edmonds in America or something, or Crockett & Jones in the UK, or R.M. Williams in Australia. Once you come to a certain stature or a job, or it's your first thing, you want to have a pair of that shoe. We'd love to be seen as that. But not just in India. We're doing that because, as I said earlier, it was the lockdown that made us look inward. With this trunk show and going forward, our idea is to come to Europe, do more here, perhaps go back to Japan, strengthen that market even further over the next 3 to 5 years. That's the plan. That when we're a global shoemaker with the internet, and that's the whole idea of having a .com, is that we're not bogged down geographically. We don't have a shop of our own even, is that we could cater to people anywhere in the world. And now with the internet, with video calls and things, we're able to do e-fittings and get people fairly confident in their sizing. So over the course of time, I'd like to see us play a better and bigger role in the global Goodyear welted space, as it were.
Yeah, cool. All right, Affan Mohammed of Bridlen Shoes, thank you very much for being part of the Shoegazing podcast.
Thank you, Jasper. This has been a wonderful evening.
Yeah, cheers.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening in on this episode. The next episode of the Shoegazing podcast will be a Q&A special with none other than Yohei Fukuda, the famous Japanese bespoke shoemaker. And you can ask your own question to him. Do it before October 11. Send it to shoegazingblog@gmail.com or send a DM on Shoegazing's Instagram. This episode will then be aired later in October, so hear you again soon.